All right, today we have a little bit of a different format today. I'm going to be interviewed by Chad from Rise25, and we're going to be talking about a book recommendation, a resource recommendation, a tool, a thought leadership that I think you should listen to, and a few issues that are affecting the podcasting industry today that I wanted to tell you about. So we'll be back with Chad in a moment, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show, and every week we have smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from all kinds of companies and organizations, and we've had Netflix, Grubhub, Redfin, Gusto, Kinko's, lots of great episodes if you check out the archives. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise25, where we help businesses give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. How do we do that? We do that by helping you to run your podcast. We are the easy button for any B2B company to launch and run a podcast. And we do three things fundamentally: strategy, accountability, and full execution on the production side so that you can create a profitable podcast. So to learn more, go to rise25.com or email our team at support@rise25. And with that, I will turn it over to Chad, who will take the lead.
All right. Hey, thanks so much, John. Great to be here. Looking forward to getting a few recommendations from you. I want a recommended book and podcast, maybe a recommended tool that listeners could benefit from using, and a person who you might recommend as a thought leader that you respect and admire. Let's start with a book or a podcast. Have you read any books lately or heard any podcasts?
Absolutely. So I've gotten on quite the Michael Pollan kick. Michael Pollan, known for The Omnivore's Dilemma and a number of other books that he's written. Tremendous writer, just really good. He calls himself a garden writer, so he mostly writes about plants and humans' interactions with plants. I read The Botany of Desire. I read How to Change Your Mind, and I read his most recent book, which is This Is Your Mind on Plants. All of them are he kind of breaks down different plants and their the way that humans interact with them. Like, for example, he'll talk about the cocoa bean, which is in coffee, and talk about caffeine, as a drug and how that affects people. And we also talk about kind of the cultural history. Part of it is a personal narrative. So he'll talk about his experience with caffeine or do an experiment like going off of caffeine while he writes the chapter, which was a bit of a disaster, and talk about the legal history, cultural history, all that kind of stuff. And very well researched, very well written. And so that's why I've just been a bit of a kick listening to his books, and it just informs our society and some of the ways that we decide to regulate ourselves as a society. And it's a little mind-boggling to think that we have these plants that grow in the woods and that we have these weird laws around them that say that you can't do anything with that plant, or it's illegal for you to grow that plant that grows naturally in the woods. Or in some instances, it's legal to grow that plant in the case of like poppy seeds, but it's illegal for you to manufacture this poppy seeds and turn them into an opioid. Unless you're a pharmaceutical company, then it's legal. So it's like these kind of crazy, wacky laws that we have. But wacky is such a lighthearted term to use because there are people that right now are in prison because they went over the line of these laws. So just very interesting series of books.
Yeah, sounds like it. Was there any regarding the plant book? As somebody for me who drinks coffee from like 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. straight, was there anything that that kind of personally affected you or impacted you or changed the way you thought about something after reading it?
Yeah. I mean, coffee and caffeine is a drug, just like, marijuana is a drug, and, mushrooms are a drug, and LSD is a drug. And, these things, they affect our behavior. The interesting thing is that it's generally been determined by society that, coffee bean and tea leaves, because they produce caffeine, that they affect us in a positive way. And, in many ways, our society has been much more productive because it allows workers to work longer hours. The downside of that is that it affects our sleep. And sleep, there are sleep researchers who say that affects our longevity, affects our lifespans. And the weird thing about it is that caffeine affects our sleep, so we take more caffeine in order to stay up, right? And I say this as someone who's got a coffee, same thing. Every day I'm having coffee, and I enjoy having coffee. And there's kind of the cultural aspect to it. There's the ritual aspect to it, So I think, I'm listening to this and, I've cut down on my coffee intake. I used to drink more of it. If you read it, you probably will feel the same way. You'll feel like, oh, geez, I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe I should have a little less coffee, and if that's the impact that you get from one of these books, then that's probably a good thing.
Is there some fine line you could walk? Like if you guzzle as much coffee as you can before 1 p.m. and then you cut it off after that, would that impact your sleep less or?
So an interesting stat that I read was that there's like a half-life to coffee that I think what the stat was in the book that said that 12 hours after you've consumed the coffee, about 25% of it is still in your body affecting you.
That's good to know. Interesting.
Yeah, good to know. So, maybe cutting it off earlier in the day will help improve your sleep that evening. Yeah.
All right, let's move on to a tool that you might recommend to listeners.
Okay, tool. So this is one that I've been crazy about recently. I almost broke my finger about a month ago now, stupidly playing football with my kids in front of my house. So I didn't even have like a good story behind it, like a bar fight or something like that. Maybe I need to make one up. But since that point, I've been like hunting, pecking, like typing. It really affects that. So I had discovered Wispr Flow before, but I'm using it even more now. So Wispr Flow is a a speech to text tool. You basically hold down a key on your keyboard, and then you speak out your words, and you can actually dictate about twice as fast as you can type. I'm a pretty fast typist, but that's pretty amazing. And so when you get in the habit of using it, you are surprised how much more productive you can be. Not to mention that it can help with things like carpal tunnel and stuff like that. I use it on my phone, and I also use it on my desktop. It's especially helpful on the phone. It's much more accurate than any other speech to text tool that I've used, to the point where it can even format things. And if you correct yourself, if you say something and then you say, no, actually, blah, 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 and you say a different phrase, it oftentimes will pick that up, and it will know that you intended to delete the first few words that you said, and it will insert the other words. And you can even say, like, list 3 things in a row, and it'll format it in terms of like bullets, 1, 2, 3, which is pretty amazing too. So when you're working on your phone and you got your thumbs here and you got to format things to send an email or text or something like that, it's really helpful. But it's also helpful in the office as well. I think that I don't know why Apple, is a multi-billion-dollar company, has got on the iPhone this speech to text technology that is inferior to this company, Wispr Flow, which is a little newer startup. But and I don't know why they haven't acquired the company yet, because it's like, it's head and shoulders above the technology that comes built into the iPhone. And yet it's really clunky to actually use. If you want to use it like in a text message, you want to use it in an email when you're on an iPhone, it's very clunky to get it to use, to work. And I've had Androids in the past as well, and I find Android is a little better actually than an iPhone, but it's still not as good as this. So Wispr Flow, I would recommend it to anyone. And there's a free plan. It's like you get 2,000 words per week. And oftentimes that's enough for me. It isn't right now because of my finger, but most of the time that's enough for me. So you can do that.
So I used to work with somebody who would always dictate all their emails and texts, not using Wispr Flow. And we'd always have to be like, can you translate your emails for us? Because we can't figure out what because you're not writing it clearly or whatever. I'm guessing Wispr Flow helps you work around that.
Yeah, this would actually help a lot with that. Yeah, because, and I find I get a lot of messages now. I think a lot of people are using voice to text technologies, and a lot of times you get them and you read it and you're like, oh, they didn't read this, or it's a voice to text thing that just didn't spit out really well. So I find with Wispr Flow, it is far more likely to be accurate.
A thought leader who you respect and admire, and you might recommend that people
I'm
follow.
going to mention my old friend Jordan Harbinger. Jordan is an OG in the podcasting space. He's been a leader. I mean, he's like the what's his name? What's his name? Edgar Allan Murrow? Is that his name? I'm
Mm-hmm.
blanking on his name. Is that the right name?
Edward Murrow,
Edward Murrow. Yeah,
journalist.
the very early journalist. Jordan, I think when we write the history of podcasting, his name has to be up there. Does an amazing job with interviews, and it goes a level, depth of vulnerability that I aspire to get to. And has just a variety of different experts. He's had, everyone from William H. Macy recently to, Kobe Bryant back in the day before he sadly passed away. And just does a great job with that. So I have to mention Jordan.
Okay, very nice. An issue affecting the B2B podcasting industry.
Yeah, so this is one that comes up a lot is swear words, and also related to that, explicit ratings on your podcast. And people ask me this, like, should I people ask all the time, should I, label my podcast explicit or not? And what I say to that is, first of all, if you're creating a podcast that's not aimed for kids, then it's not that big a deal to label it as explicit. And the reason why you'd want to do it is because even if you don't label it as explicit, first of all, it's not that recognizable for most platforms. Like if you go on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, it's a tiny, tiny little E that you can't even notice. However, if you don't label your podcast episodes as explicit, inevitably what will happen is that there will be an episode where either you forget and the guest says a swear word, or someone doesn't even say a swear word, but the algorithm thinks that there's a swear word. And so, Apple Podcasts or Spotify or something will label it as an explicit episode, and that will stand out more than other episodes that are not labeled as explicit. And so sometimes that drives people crazy. Talking about the podcaster, right? Like they're like, oh, why is this standing out looking explicit? No one's going to want to listen to that episode, which may or may not be true. But it just bothers people more and becomes more of a distraction. So to prevent it from being a distraction, what I say to people is just label it as explicit. It's intended for adults anyways. And when people look at your podcast episodes in a, on their phone or on the computer and Spotify and Amazon Music or wherever, they're just their eye is probably going to glaze over it because there's a tiny little E on the right side. That's not even what they're looking at. They're looking at the content of the episode or who the guest is or something like that. So it's not that big a deal. So that's what I say to people all the time.
So if you're a host, would you say just be natural, be yourself, and if you swear, you swear? Would you say avoid swearing for B2B purposes?
Yeah.
I listen to some sports podcasts and they swear all the time. It doesn't even affect me. But from a B2B standpoint, is it different?
From a B2B standpoint, I think it is. You want your podcast to be a reflection of your brand. Mm-hmm. And if you want your brand to be clean and not have profanity in it, then that's fine. I think the highest compliment you can get from someone is when someone meets you and they've listened to your podcast and they say, you seem just like as you are on your podcast. And that's the benefit of doing a podcast, is because it gives you this tool that allows you to capture a piece of you and broadcast it essentially, and people could listen to it on their own time, and thousands of people could listen to it. So they're getting to know you. So just make sure that's an accurate reflection of who you are and who you want your brand to be. And there are plenty of B2B brands that, are edgy and they, have profanity throughout a conversation, or maybe they would swear naturally if they were talking to a prospective client, or maybe it's mature subject matter or whatever. So just have it be an accurate reflection of who you are. If you would naturally swear in a conversation with a client, then you probably have no issue with putting it into your podcast episodes. So that's just what I would say about that.
Okay, sounds good. All right, last thing. A case study of a business who's been using podcasts to establish their thought leadership and authority. I think you had somebody that you had in mind.
I have to give a shout out to our client, Samir. Samir came to us a while back and a couple of years ago now and wanted to start a podcast. He has a digital agency in the e-commerce space serving e-commerce clients. And, the typical challenge was not atypical to what most businesses are dealing with is they wanted a authentic way to get into conversation with clients that are ideal clients for them, their ICP. And so, we helped guide him on starting a podcast. And what's really notable and memorable about him is that he kept it very simple to begin with. He didn't get hung up on, the artwork has to be perfect. The intro music has to be flawless. Because of that, I'm going to have my sister-in-law who's flaky, who is going to take 2 months to produce an original piece of music or whatever. He didn't get caught up on those sorts of things. In fact, when he started, he used the same 7 questions for each of the episodes. But he used the podcast as a tool to get into conversation with prospective clients and to demonstrate his knowledge, demonstrate his expertise, share some wisdom with them, and build trust and authority. And as a result of that, he told me recently that he could attribute $2 to $3 million in revenue to his business directly from the podcast. And that's what happens when you are really effective about this, when you really are disciplined about it, you don't overthink it, and you use podcast in a B2B context and in a very effective B2B context. So I think that would be one that I would recommend to people.
That is an amazing amount of revenue. Hey, John, it's been great to talk to you as always. Thanks so much for having me today.
Chad, thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
So long, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.